with you. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I'm just going to pick up on the question about the change in law provision in the renewable energy, the REP process. Is there a change in law provision in the REP contract?
Yeah, there is. The difference, and again, somebody with a legal background can explain it better than myself, but that's a pretty standard thing in a lot of agreements. The difference is if there's a small change in the law, the compensation or consideration would be for the small change. The difference in the one that we're disputing was there was a small change in law and the companies wanted to claim they were losing some money before that and they wanted to claim that as well. So there's a huge difference in the way they've been written.
Right. But I think you said it yourself, these provisions are quite common. I guess in doing the research you did on the previous PPA setup, because clearly you had to dig into that, and you've talked about the change in law provision that was brought in your words, sort of behind, I can't remember the exact words, but sort of implying that it's a sort of a secret backroom deal, I think is what you've said those words. Was that the only change made at that time, or were there any other changes made immediately before those contracts were let, or those arrangements, the PPAs were let? Was that the only thing that changed, or was there a series of other things that happened in around the same time and using that same mechanism?
There's a series of addendums that were approved by that at the same time. Those want to be addendums.
Yeah, there were, from what I understand, a series of addendums approved at that time.
So are you being selective in your, I mean, and the reason this is material and relevant today is that the reaction that you've had right from the very beginning to this is, you know, occasionally politics has been known to break out in the Legislative Assembly, and that's my observation of what seems to happen here. There was a set, fixed idea of what you wanted to do, and you needed to adjust some perception around that. And you've, I think, quite, I have to say, skillfully used the complexity of this whole area to create a narrative that there was some sort of backroom dealing, when really it appears to me that this is just a normal and ordinary course of a contract negotiation in a very complex area, to the point where your current REP contract has a very similar provision. And you've taken Alberta down a path which has cost taxpayers hundreds of millions of dollars at best case, probably over $1 billion, and that's something that I think Albertans should be rightly concerned about. What's the difference between what happened then with a series of addendums and where we are today? Was there not another way of going about this?
So the addendums, at the time that were done, there was a number of addendums. The significant majority of those addendums were formulaic addendums. The one substantive addendum that was identified by the government was the one where they had identified a shift where it had the or more unprofitable clause inside of that particular part of the change in law provision. There isn't that particular detail inside of the change in law provision that the electric system operators built into their support agreement. That change in law provision is predicated on if there is a change in law that creates a cost associated with an item, then that cost associated with the item is discussed with the electric system operator, and decisions are made associated with the that shift in cost and the allocation of that particular cost, but doesn't affect the entirety of the payouts associated with that particular agreement.
Okay. Well, thank you for that answer.
If I could add too, you know, I think the difference is this change of law in these agreements is publicly posted for all to see. The ones in the past were not.
All right. I'm going to move on to the NWA Partnership Operations. The budget in 2017-18 was for revenues of $36,700,000. The forecast is zero. The estimate for this fiscal 18-19 is $77.4 million. Can you just tell us? I know from previous answers that as a result of the startup being delayed. What risk do you feel there is that that 77.4 million will not be realized this year? What are the risks to Alberta taxpayers of this particular investment?
Yeah, I'm sorry, what page, Greg, were you?
Oh, 126 on the big blue book, the government estimates. So I guess really, the real question, and apologies for interrupting, we've got 4 minutes left. The real question is, what is the total anticipated updated cost to taxpayers from the NWR project as a whole? I've raised concerns in the past that that taxpayers are at potentially substantial risk here, and I recognize there is some potential benefit, but costs seem to be going up, timelines are slipping, and there's a grave concern that we may be, in fact, in a position where we're losing money on this
So I might
project.
ask Mike he's been involved with this project for probably the longest of anyone, and are you able to give some clarity, Mike, to that?
Yes, I can give some clarity to that.
Sure.
Thank you very much. Mike Eklund, Assistant Deputy Minister, Resource Revenue Operations. Perhaps if the member could repeat the question just to make sure I'm answering it.
Yeah, what's an updated assessment of the risk of the Northwest Redwater Partnership Operations piece in terms of potential for not realizing the revenues we've estimated this year, potential for commercial risk around commodity pricing, operational risk around whether barrels can be produced in the way we thought they could be, the carbon offtake, all of that kind of stuff.
Okay, I'll go through sort of the key ones, and certainly there is a risk in terms of what the capital cost is. There has been a recent announcement. The minister stated this morning that the expected cost is now $8.7 billion. I think the last cost that was forecasted was 9.4 plus 1 to 2%, so 9.7 is above that. That will mean that there will be an additional requirement for equity and for sub-debt and senior debt.
You misspoke. You said 8.7. You might want to just clarify that.
Oh, I'm sorry. 9.7. I guess I'm still living in 2017 or 16. My apologies. Yes, from 9.4 plus 1 to 2% was the last one, now 9.7. And yes, of course, that does increase the costs, both in the amount of equity required, the amount of debt required, and that will flow into the tolls. We have not done, I have not done a calculation in terms of what those tolls look like. Each year we do, APMC does an analysis of an owner's contract, and when that is completed, that will be reported in the annual report. My assessment is that we still expect the refinery to be profitable, and but we certainly recognize that there is a risk. There is always risks that there will be additional delays in the startup timing. The closer you get to completion of a project, the narrower those risks should be in terms of the cost of the facility and the startup and timing, but there are still risks, and there will be until it actually gets started up and we see if it's running once the entire facility is up. There will be risks, of course, on the commodity side. As you know, prices are volatile, and this will depend very much over the next 30, 40 or more years what product prices are, what feedstock prices are. So there will be impacts of a number of issues, such as pipeline capacity, what happens with the marine fuel issues, and so on.
I mean, what option, and just in the last 30 seconds here, if we find we're in a position where we're chasing good money after bad, costs keep going up, we're into a negative position, what option do we have to get out of this deal?
At this point, my assessment is that there is very little process for terminating an agreement. Able to obtain debt in the market for a reasonable cost, there must be reasonable certainty. for
Excuse me,
that.
sir.